Years ago, I was in a bad car accident. An older man turned left in front of me at an intersection and T-boned me. Ambulances were called. I was put on a backboard with a neck brace and brought to the hospital where I was deposited on the gurney in a hallway as there were no rooms available at that time. I lay there for quite a while waiting to be seen. My injuries weren't bad, basically just got banged around and bruised up, so I was okay with the waiting. But I was in pain and laying on my back was very uncomfortable. I didn't think there was anything wrong with my neck. The only pain I felt was due to the damn neck brace digging into the bottom of my skull, and I really wanted to lay in a different position, not only to alleviate some of the pain in the rest of my body, hopefully, but also because I was parked right under a light that was blaring in my eyes the whole time, so I started taking off my neck brace. A nurse spotted me doing this and ran over very upset with me and told me I had to keep the neck brace on. I tried telling her my neck was fine, but she was adamant that I not remove the brace until the doctor had examined me, which I get. I'm guessing at the very least it goes very much against protocol, and at the very worst it would have been a huge liability if I took the brace off and there was something wrong. Plus, I didn't want to piss off the nurse or be one of Enno's patients, so I begrudgingly complied even though I thought it was overkill. I tried to reposition myself as best I could to the least painful position, not very successfully, unfortunately. However, the damn light blaring directly down was driving me crazy, even when I closed my eyes. Finally, out of frustration, I took the blanket that was over me, pulled it up more, and threw it over my head. Finally, no more light in my eyes. Bliss! I just laid there trying to block the pain and daydream to pass the time, wondering how long I would be there for. Not too long after I hear what sounds like a bit of a commotion and someone saying something about a dead person in the hallway. I was like, oh my God, that's freaky. I got that there were no rooms available, but to leave a dead body just laying out for everyone to see? I thought that was uber creepy. Suddenly, the same nurse that gave me shit about the neck brace pulls the blanket off my head, scaring the shit out of me, and she starts yelling at me that I'm not allowed to put the blanket over my head, and what the hell was I doing? It was then that I realized the dead body they were talking about was me. I said, oh shit, I'm so sorry. I just wanted the light out of my eyes and I can't move my head with the neck damn brace on. To say the nurse was not impressed would be an understatement. But she did find a room to move me and positioned me not under any light, which I thanked her very much for. She just gave me a surly look and walked away. Sorry. I live in Sydney and used to fly up to the Gold Coast 3 or 4 times a year to check on my grandmother. The whole family was in Sydney, so someone would usually pop up once each month to help her out. Anyway, I would always rent a car from Hertz when I arrived. At the time, they offered a prepaid fuel option, where you would pay an amount and not need to refuel before return. It was usually less than you would pay at the local service station, so I usually took this option as I picked up the keys to this shiny new manual Toyota Corolla. The woman said to me, "So you have the prepaid fuel? Just bring it back empty." After a few days of relaxing by the beach, I ran a few errands for my grandmother in the morning before my 1500 flight when the fuel light comes on and the words of Hertz staff ring in my ear, "Bring it back empty." Not wanting to push it, I pulled into 7-Eleven and put 2 liters in and went on my way. The light didn't extinguish, but with the distance I needed to cover, I figured I'd be safe. About 1300, my grandmother is pushing me out the door, telling me to catch my flight, so I make the 6 trip to the airport, the whole time anxiously wondering if I'll make it with the fuel remaining. As I was coming up on the airport, I felt the engine splutter, but it was still going. Heading in, it started sputtering more. So much so that I genuinely thought I'd run out mere meters from my destination. As I pulled through the boom gate for rental returns, I put my foot down and got a final burst of acceleration. The car, determined to be the little engine that could, my finish line in sight, and the car is going to make it, until it didn't. The car stalled. With the momentum I had, I pulled it into a spot marked Avis. It only made it about halfway in. I tried in vain to restart it, but it wasn't to be. I got out and pushed the little engine that could into bay 109. I was 11 bays short of the first marked Hertz and was a broken man. My goal so near yet so far. Torment ran through my mind. Did those 11 bays mean I was short of my goal to bring it back empty? I mean, it was in the rental car park after all, and it wasn't uncommon for people to just park in it. Spot and ignore who owns the spot. I walk into the terminal, carry on roller bay in one hand, car keys in the other, and walk up to rental returns. Can I help you? The same young woman asks. As I walk up to her returning a car, I said she takes the paperwork and asks where I had parked at bay 109. It says Avis, I respond. Her not looking up, she shrugs and talks into the radio on the counter return. 100 now. Finally, she says, did you fill it up? I say no, and she asks roughly how much is left. None, I say. Oh, so the petrol light is on. No worries, she says. No, I say. I mean, it ran out of fuel as I drove in. I had to push it into the parking spot. The helpful woman gives me a blank stare for a full 10 seconds. Wait, you let it run out. You said return it empty, so I accepted your challenge. Seems I win, I said with a mixture of pride and embarrassment. The staff member turns to her colleague, points at me, and says prepaid fuel, and he says it ran out in the car park. The guy looks at me with a smirk and says, really well, it wouldn't start back up. I reply as someone comes in from outside to get the keys. It's out of fuel. The woman says that's okay. I'll run it up to Shell after I've washed it, he replies. Both terminal staff look at him as the woman, looking at me, says no. The customer says he had to push it into the spot queue. The largest eyes I've ever seen. I have to see them. He walks out with me and the guy from behind the counter following behind, opens the car and tries to start it. It's cranking, but won't turn over as all three of us burst out laughing. I've never had one fully out before, he says, when I tell him the woman in there told me bring it back empty. As I walk inside, laughing to check my bags. A local man wanted to run his print campaign advertisements for elected office. He'd done this a few times before in a number of unsuccessful bids for election. Now he had returned and was giving us an earful. The only reason I lost the last time was because all my ads got changed and looked stupid. We had changed his ad with us, slightly. He'd misspelled the name of the office he had been running for, so we had corrected it. Apparently, that made the ad look differently than he wanted and had somehow cost him the election. I'm paying you for these ads, so this time I demand you print it exactly as I wrote it. No changes. He stormed off, and I figured the issue was over. Made my job easy. I thought, there is no need to proofread this. Just send it over to our advertising person. But let me look at it anyway. I read it over and told others, and it wasn't long before the whole office had a good laugh. His advertisement read, his name, for elected office, always there for you to help. What makes it even better is we later learned he had apparently made a similar speech and demand at the offices of other newspapers where he ran the advertising as well, so they all had the same wording. He lost the election. Again, he did not, however, complain about his advertisement this time. This morning, I got into my car and realized I left my headlights on. Thankfully, modern technology meant it had automatically switched off when the key was removed, but it reminded me of a time where that wasn't so. Many years ago, I was working one of my first jobs in a little café nearing the end of my training period. It was a quiet day, perfect to put the newbie on with only one experienced staff member. The experienced staff member called in sick. Boss had to come in and cover until Sue could come in early. Boss wanted to use the time on site to do paperwork out the back. I'll be in here if you have any questions. I very annoyingly had a lot of questions. How to void an incorrect transaction, where to find more special paper for the credit card machine, what to do when the coffee grinder stopped working. Finally, boss said, I'm busy. Don't bother me unless it's an emergency. Let me know when Sue is here. Shyly, I replied, that's what I came to tell you. Sue just arrived. Great. Any more questions, ask her. Sue took over the coffee area and got me on restocking, clearing tables, and emptying the bins and other necessary grunt work. I went out to the outside bins through the little staff parking area and saw my boss's old car there with the headlights still on. I went back to my boss's office. Boss. Is it an emergency? Boss snapped. Not to me, I replied. Then go away. I left quickly. I went to tell Sue instead. Sue, then I changed my mind. Boss doesn't want to be disturbed unless it's an emergency. So I'm supposed to ask you if I have more questions. Sue and I worked pleasantly until the end of my shift a few hours later. As I gathered my things to leave, Boss ran by me, knocking into me a bit. Without turning around to see if I was okay, Boss said. Sorry, I'm in a rush. I slowed down to see what happened next, getting out my brick of a phone to text my mother I was on my way home. I could hear my boss swearing. Up. Oh no, Boss realized. That was what I was going to tell them earlier. I was in trouble. Can you bring your car in and give me a jump start? My battery is flat. Only a few cars could fit, so only senior staff and management could park there. I walked here. I live 10 minutes walk up the hill. I raced off before Boss could blame me. The next time I was on shift with Sue, I asked what happened to Boss. Headlights left on. Got a flat battery. Boss tried to jump start it with my car, but it didn't work. Had to call a taxi. Funny that neither of us noticed the lights were on when we walked by it. And I realized, of course, she had to have seen it when she walked in. I can only imagine why she didn't say anything either. I currently work in HR for a company that has been mistreating their employees and frequently talks down to them, speaking to them as if they're not smart enough to understand what she's saying and as though they're beneath her. It's only been about 6 months since I started here, and I noticed it pretty quickly. After I mentioned it to the most guilty manager, I began getting talked down to. At one time, after I called out sick, I got reprimanded, stating that I had to be on site whenever my manager was not. This was the first time it was being mentioned to me, though, so I can't be sick if she's out. They couldn't find anything else to fuss at me about, so that was it. Over the past few months, I've built a relationship with the hourly employees, which are in a union. They tell me about whispers around the plant, future plans, who's thinking about quitting, family stuff, really just whatever they want to talk about. Recently, I landed a great job, which I start in a couple of weeks. I found out that my manager is going to be out of town the week before I'm supposed to start my new job. My plan was to work up until I start the new job, but then I was talked down to again by this same toxic manager. So I went into her office and told her that I know she isn't supposed to be at work on Eggs's dates, but she would have to be since one of us has to be on site, and I'll no longer work here then. Needless to say, she was pretty upset that she had to change her plans, and I've been getting the evil eye from her since I dropped my notice. I've been hearing her complaining to coworkers about how she had to cancel her trip, but she's been extremely nice to my face and hasn't talked down to once.